everybody to Mary Giuliani Live. I am really thrilled you're here tonight. We have a great show. We've got Shawn Andrews, who is the author of The Power of Perception, and we're going to be talking about some really powerful stuff around women's equality issues. So it's going to be really, really exciting. But before we get to Shawn, I want to just go over a couple of announcements and how you can participate. What's cool about live stream is that you can actually chat in your questions. So we are live streaming on Facebook Live as well as my website, which is Mary Giuliani Live, watch live if you can see that URL. The only place I can take questions, though, is on the website chat. So right below the live stream on that page of my website, there's a little chat box. You just have to log in, and we would be glad to go over any questions you have for Shawn or me. So please do that. Also, I wanted to just let everybody know that's new to the show. The whole purpose of this show is really to inspire and empower you to create a life you love by being true to yourself and getting really turned on and inspired by the guests that I bring on. And of course, like I said, you can actually ask questions. And also, I wanted to put this out there at every show that I would love to get any questions that you have for me, like in between shows, and I can like answer a guest question at the end of the show. So if you're interested in asking me anything, I am a transformational life coach. You can email that to mary@marygiuliani.net, and you can see the spelling of it right up there. Also, if you're on Facebook Live right now, what's really helpful is if you could actually share this live stream while it's live, because that way people that you know will get notified and they can be supported too in really having a life they love. So if you can do that. The other thing you can do to be in touch with what's going on and who we've got coming up on the shows is make sure you sign up for my newsletter at marygiuliani.net, and there's a free newsletter there. What else? Oh, by the way, I wanted to mention, I just recently was able to get all of the, actually 3 out of 5 of the recordings in audio-only format for those of you that are multitaskers like me, that if you want to, be walking and listening, you can, listen to an MP3 versus a full video, which is kind of data consuming. So go to the talk show archives at marygiuliani.net and download or listen to the live audio-only version. And one last thing before we get started is I recently wrote a blog, and it's really my second coming out story, if you will, and I won't go into detail about it, but it's really about what got me on the path and why I'm even doing this show. So for any of you that want to find more self-acceptance and want to get in touch with really being true to yourself and living your highest calling, the blog post is the last one I just did. It's on my website at marygiuliani.net/blog. And it's entitled Over 50 and Afraid of Dying with Your Music Still in You. So it's a really good post. Anyway, so with that, I'm really, really excited to bring on Dr. Shawn Andrews. And I've known Shawn for a couple of years now, and she just wrote this wonderful book, The Power of Perception. And sorry if I'm reading, but I don't have it like memorized, and I don't have a teleprompter yet. So. It's The Power of Perception, Leadership, Emotional Intelligence, and the Gender Divide. And oh my God, stay tuned, you guys, for this. This is such, I was blown away by some of the statistics that she's got in here about what's going on with women's equality. I was really, truly blown away. So let me bring on Shawn, and she can tell us even more about it. So here we go. Shawn, are you there?
Hi, Mary. Yeah, so great to be here.
I know, it's so great to be with you. Like I was just sharing, I was really blown away by what's going on with women's equality issues. And so before we get totally into the book, I'm just curious, what made you really get excited about this topic and what's going on with women's equality? And also, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about, I know you're a professor at Pepperdine and that sort of thing, that'd be great.
Yeah, so my journey has been, well, like many, like many folks, it has different paths, winding. So my background is I was in corporate America for more than 20 years and doing corporate roles. And I was actually in my corporate job in pharmaceuticals. And I started really getting interested when the data first came out about a decade ago about the statistics around women in the workplace and women in leadership. I was really intrigued by the data. And I remember working this corporate job, but then thinking on the side that I would really want to pursue, I really want to do something along the lines of women in leadership. And so,
Right.
and so, fast forward just a couple years after that, that I entered my doctoral program at Pepperdine in 2010. And I knew early on that I wanted to study women in leadership early on, and then I've also, because I want to explore, the statistics and what keeps women from reaching those upper echelons of leadership, and what's behind it all. And so that really intrigued me. And then emotional intelligence, I've always been fascinated by that as well, and I've done a lot of training on that in the corporate world. And so for my dissertation, I decided just to throw it all together and study women, leadership, emotional intelligence, and the barriers and all that. And what I found out from the research and statistics is that there's just a lot of overlap in all of it. And it all boils down to perception of women. It has nothing to do with women's skills or competencies. It has everything to do with perception.
I know. That was what was so mind-blowing for me, just reading your book. It was like, okay, I knew that there was, the pay gap and these sorts of things. And in some ways, I think I've been sort of out of touch with it because I've been in my own business for a long time, and as well as a sales executive, and so I wasn't really paid based on a salary. It was always based on my sales or the business that I was in. So I didn't really have that kind of experience, and when you go into it in the book, it was like, oh my God! I mean, just some of the. I think it's important that the viewers know some of the stats here. Out of the 195 independent countries in the world, 22 are led by women, which is 11%. And when you think about it, like, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, what that means is 90% of the decisions in everything that's going on in the world is made by men. I mean, it just trickles down from there. So anyway, and then going into like what is it, like 85%? We only make 85% for every dollar, 85 cents for every dollar that a man makes. And so anyway, keep going.
Yeah. So along those lines, so you're right. So roughly 10% of the world's leaders are women. So, but the implications, just like you said, the implications for that are huge because men are making decisions based on women's lives and women's interests and women's families. So what happens is if women don't have a seat at that table, women's interests are just ignored or dismissed or ignored altogether. And so that is what has happened for decades. And here we are in the 21st century. We're long past women's movements. We're long past women's suffrage, but yet globally we're looking at 10%, and it's even worse if you look at just statistics among U.S. businesses. Currently, there are only 20 female CEOs leading our biggest corporations, and so that equates to about 4%. So in the U.S. we're actually doing worse from a leadership perspective than globally, and we just have a long way to go, and so that's what the book addresses. I've seen a number of my talented colleagues, females, who were passed over for promotion for various reasons, and I've seen scores of men just leapfrog up into leadership based, primarily on the fact that they had a good relationship with their boss, or they played golf with their boss, or they had drinks with their boss after dinner. And so, I just saw over and over that the merits of women and the skills that women bring to the workplace, they're being overlooked, and it just struck me that there are so many intelligent, powerful women who are are tremendous leaders, and people love working for them that don't really get any traction in the workplace because of these barriers. And so that really concerns me that we have talented women out there that aren't given the same opportunities, but then from a talent management standpoint, that also means companies aren't leveraging half of their workforce and half of their talent. they're not really leveraging the talent that's inherent in their workforce. And so that's a missed opportunity. And so I think from both an individual as well as an organizational perspective, we have some work to do.
Right, absolutely. You know, I just was looking at these stats too, and then I thought we could get into like what the barriers are, and then maybe how you go through how to overcome the barriers. But like just from a standpoint of legal rights, how women in our country end up legally and economically dependent on their husbands, and how like out of all the people that are in poverty, it's like, what is it, something like 70% are women. And so I guess when it comes to looking at this issue, and like it's easy to kind of say, oh, the guys are just, you know, not being fair with us, and it's their fault, and you know, we need to focus on enlightening them. But what you go into is that women's perception of themselves has a contributing factor as well. And like what I was really blown away with was the stats on the most common professions for women, like administrative assistants, teachers, nurses, are like they still are going into those professions even and still getting paid less than even the men that are in the same professions.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
you're actually hitting on one of the statistics that surprised me the most. Is that looking at the top 3 female professions, which are, as you mentioned, administrative assistant, teacher, and nurse. Top 3. Those are, according to the Department of Labor, those are the top 3 occupations for women. Even among those top 3, men out-earn women. And so even there, so that, I mean, and we're all aware, you know, nowadays that the pay gap is substantial, and it's understandable why it's such a hot button issue for many women, because if you look at the numbers over time, it not only impacts a woman, you know, in her current job, but it has a ripple effect on the family. And if you extrapolate those numbers out to 20 or 30 years, the data shows that women end up losing around, I think it's somewhere around 200,000 less than men if you extrapolate that out. And so it's understandable why it's such an important issue. You know, and we're not quite there. We're currently at 79 cents on average, 79 cents on the dollar. It depends on
like 60 cents or something in the 60s or 70s or something.
Exactly. So we've only jumped about a dime in what 40 years, which is not so good.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, another stat that blew my mind was on how you've got here that women now comprise 57% of the total job market, and a full 60% of all the bachelor's degrees, and also we outpace men with master and doctorate degrees. And the reason I brought this up is like, okay, we're 57% of the workplace. Can't we just go on strike? You know what I mean? It's like I don't think and you know, I'm obviously a feminist, but I didn't even realize that. It's like, you know, wow.
Yeah.
It seems like if there was more awareness, like, of the power that we have as a collective, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think that would go a long way if we started leveraging our actual numbers in the workplace. But it's so hard because it's you know, it's scattered over.
Ingrained.
Yeah. Plus the even the 57%, that's 57% is the number of women in the U.S. workforce, but that's scattered across thousands of companies and hundreds of industries.
Yeah.
And it would be really hard to leverage our collective power, but I think it's a great idea to do that.
Yeah.
But
it reminded me of that book, Atlas Shrugged, you know. She's like, I don't know if the principle was the same, but the point of the whole title was that what if the people that were carrying the majority of the workload just shrugged their shoulders and said, we're going on strike, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, what was the other thing? Oh, so let's talk about the barriers and then some of the solutions, because, you know, obviously we want to get into the solution. We have to face the problem, obviously, first, but, you know, you talk about all the different barriers, and I'm just curious, well, first of all, if you wouldn't mind touching on how emotional intelligence impacts like women's leadership and what do you, if you could define emotional intelligence and that sort of thing and leadership models?
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a lot there. First of all, emotional intelligence. For those of your viewers who aren't familiar with it, it's essentially your people skills. So you have your IQ, which is your intellectual intelligence, and then just for simplicity purposes, your emotional intelligence is how well you connect with other people, how well you can get along and play in the sandbox with others, essentially, in a very simplified definition. But what data has showed for decades is that it's not about IQ. Most of us are smart enough. We're smart enough to make it through school. We're smart enough to, be successful in our jobs, and be, happy in life. So, but what it comes down to is emotional intelligence, is how well we get along with others and how successful we'll be. And emotional intelligence has also been shown to be a key driver of leadership effectiveness as well. So that's why I studied it from the perspective of gender, is I was interested in seeing how emotional intelligence varies among men and women and how that plays into leadership, as you asked. So basically, what I found from my research is that men and women overall are equally emotionally intelligent. If you look at all the EQ competencies, overall, in millions of people worldwide, we're equally emotionally intelligent. However, and there is a big however here, we do differ in gender-specific EQ competencies. So, for example, men tend to score higher than women in areas of confidence, assertiveness, and stress tolerance. Overall, women tend to score higher than men in areas of empathy, social responsibility, and interpersonal relationships. So we do see the data falling out along gender lines if you look at those competencies. Now, a caveat, not all men and women fall along gender lines. So, for example, when I've taken EQ assessments several times, and when I took it, I was surprised because I actually was stronger in some of the male-specific attributes, like confidence and assertiveness and decision-making, things like that. And I actually was lowest in empathy, which really surprised me. Yeah, and so knowing that, that's an area I have since focused on to try improve that. But so not all men and women fall along those gender lines. And I've also had men come up to me after my presentations and say, Shawn, I actually am higher in the female-specific attributes. And fantastic.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And so, there's no right or wrong here, but when you look overall at the patterns and the trends, we do see some differences in gender-specific competencies. So you're probably thinking, why is this important? Well, it's important because of the value placed on those competencies in the workplace. So a confident, assertive leader in general is valued in the workplace more than a empathetic woman who's great at building relationships. And
interesting.
It shouldn't be. And so it comes down to how we value and how we perceive these emotional intelligence competencies. I'll give you some specific examples. So from the women that I interviewed from my research and from my book as well, the ones that were higher in the male-specific attributes, so let's say they were higher in confidence or assertiveness, they shared stories with me that they were actually told to tone down their assertiveness and be a team player, and many of them met with resistance if they were, bold and decisive, because being a female, they were expected to be an empathetic leader. And so what happens is women are met with gender stereotypes. So I'll give you another example on the flip side of that. Women who are naturally higher in the female-specific attributes. So let's say they're an empathetic woman, naturally.
Right.
They also shared stories with me that somehow, if you're an empathetic leader, you're viewed as being as lacking intelligence and substance. So basically, being empathetic and being analytical are mutually exclusive, and that's the perception. Yeah,
right.
And so,
even though it's not even true.
Exactly, it's not true at all. But the overwhelming perception of a female leader who is naturally empathetic is that, well, she's empathetic, she's good with people, she can't be very analytical or have much substance. And of course, that's not true at all. But what happens is based on gender-specific EQ competencies, women are met with gender stereotypes.
Right.
And so women, so the EQ competencies are valued differently in the workplace, and that plays into perception of women, which also lack of promotion. So that's the tie-in.
I'm just curious with the whole election, and I don't want to get into like just, you know, I'll just say it. What would as far as Hillary's EQ goes, emotional intelligence?
Yes.
What's your take on how that played out in the election?
You know, that is a fantastic question, and I have to share for your viewers, Mary, that none of them knew that you were going to ask me this question, but I have a fantastic answer for you, because this is an example that I share in the classroom with my MBA students that I teach. So when I first introduced emotional intelligence to the class, I share an example of U.S. presidents. It's a study done out of Princeton about 10 years ago. Actually, about 10 years ago. So they looked at key success factors for U.S. presidents and found that they found that emotional intelligence was one of the key factors to the success of a presidency. So just off the top of your head, and so, you know, full disclosure, no one knows I was going to ask you this question, but just off the top of your head, based on what information you may have about emotional intelligence, which presidents do you think would have been higher in emotional intelligence? Which of our U.S. presidents? Right.
The first three I think of are Lincoln, Clinton, and Obama.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You could throw Reagan in there as well. Yep, Reagan would be another one. Kennedy, probably Kennedy as well.
Yes.
Okay, so just based on your own intuition, you naturally know that. So let me ask you, which U.S. presidents do you think would have been lower in emotional intelligence?
Well, Trump. Who else? Let me think here. Hold on just a second. Nixon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's a coldness, kind of a distance, a disconnect with the less emotionally intelligent people.
That's right. That's right. You probably could add Bush, or both Bushes to that list.
Bush, Papa Bush, or
both.
W?
Both.
Okay.
Both, actually. You could probably add Carter to that list. So and then Hillary, you know, Hillary's a tough one, because I don't think she doesn't connect as well with people as perhaps Obama or someone like a Kennedy or even a Reagan. But I also think part of that, I think gender bias also plays into people's perceptions of Hillary. And actually, I think that played in part of the reason why she didn't win is just unspoken, perhaps hidden biases that people were aware of that they have against women leaders. So going back to the U.S. presidents, so what makes, you know, so why do we instinctively just know which presidents were more successful and which weren't? And the reason for that is that those higher in emotional intelligence are better able to connect. They can inspire people. They motivate people. They're better at getting their ideas across, and people can understand it. People want to follow them. And so this is transformational leadership. I know it's the theme of your talk show, but this is what transformational leadership is about followers and leaders and working together collaboratively and collectively are both transformed. And that's why it's called transformational leadership. And women are actually very good at this, transformational leadership. And so the presidents that we talked about, you know, those were able to connect and motivate their followers. And then those who were shown to be lower in emotional intelligence that we mentioned, and also in the study that from Princeton, those presidents were they were smart, of course, but again, that's not the issue. They were unable to connect with people. They were unable to inspire people and influence people, and it's because of lower emotional intelligence levels that they were unable to do that. And so it really comes into play with, I mean, it affects the legacy of presidents even. So it's pretty powerful stuff. And yeah.
Well, thank you for going into that. Again, reading the book was just like, it made total sense. And yet I noticed, well, you guys may have noticed that have been watching this show, I was kind of really angry when I first saw all those numbers of how big a gap there was with just pay and leadership and everything. And yet, what I loved about the book is that you really helped me understand why it is the way it is and some of the things that we can do about it. And so it's really it seems like it's really about, well, you're the expert, obviously, but my sense is that it's more about really raising awareness of it. And, well, also, the other thing that blew my mind is that when women are in leadership, the profits rise in companies. So if a company is so profit-driven and thinking that a man can maybe drive if that's what they're in a for-profit company, you would think that, that they would want to have more diversity with leaders. So just, if you wouldn't mind sharing, what are some specific strategies that we can implement just as an individual woman or as a manager or a leader to help bridge this gap?
Yeah. Oh, boy. Well, the book, so my background is in training, in the corporate world was largely training and development. So, I'm a trainer at heart. So I understand adult learning and the need to make things practical and provide strategies. And on top of that, I teach it. I'm a professor at Pepperdine, and so having tangible things you can walk away with, I think is critically important. And so at the end of every chapter, I included strategies for every single topic, whether it's bias, whether it's work-life balance, whether it's gender culture differences, how we're wired and socialized differently, strategies around that. I have strategies around diversity, as well as individuals and organizations. So the good news is there's a number of things we could do as both individuals, women who want to advance in their career. There's a lot of things to do. For men, there's lots of things that men can also help with and help partner with women in the workplace, and there's lots of things organizations can do, both CEOs as well as human resource departments. And so, I think just to really boil it all down is we need men and women working together in gender partnership. And we can't do it without men. We absolutely cannot, because based on the statistics, the vast majority of men are in decision-making positions of power. And so we can't affect any change without men on board. And so having men as partners to women is essential.
And how would you, maybe just a couple of examples based on different biases, but how would you start that sort of enrollment process with men? You know what I mean? How do you bring them on board? Yeah. So, there's actually there's a couple disconnects out there. So you mentioned, Mary, it was a very good question. You mentioned about the data behind companies performing better with more diversity. Yeah. And that's now that there's overwhelming data now around that to show that when we have more diversity, gender diversity, age diversity, racial and ethnic diversity, LGBT, disabled workers, the more diversity we have, there's tons of data to show that the bottom line is improved for companies. Right.
And So the data's out there, but I think there's still a disconnect between many CEOs about what the issues are. They're not really. I don't think it's not that they don't want to improve. I just think they're not aware of the data and the numbers behind the diversity that drives diversity. And I found that with men, it's not intentional. The vast majority of men want to support women, but one, they're just simply unaware. They're just unaware of the issues.
It makes sense because they're not in that fishbowl, if you will. You know what I mean? They're not living it. Like, you know, how can you share with them the benefits of why it's going to be a win for them to have more women in their organizations and that sort of a thing? So,
Absolutely.
and I mean, your book is just so powerful. The way I love how you tie in emotional intelligence with leadership and really bring in the numbers to prove that it's a win for everybody the more diverse that we get. And so, anyway, would you mind sharing just one or two ways that a woman can take a step toward like a equal level in her company?
Sure. So one of the things, and this is where this will help men and women actually, is when it comes to sponsorship. So there are role models. We all know what role models are, right? We need more female role models. There's mentors, and we all know what mentors are. Women need male and female mentors. But sponsors are those who advocate for you to get to your next position. Mentors help you in your current position. Sponsors are for your next position. Women need male sponsors more than female. Oh. The reason I suggest this is picture a high-level meeting. So let's say a board meeting, and the vice president Nancy chimes in and says, "I think Susan should be promoted. She's fantastic." Right. Okay. Well, that may fall on deaf ears, or it may just be dismissed. 10 minutes later, if Bob says, "Susan's fantastic. I think she should be promoted," that is going to carry more weight than if Nancy says it. Now, the reason for that is that people may assume that Nancy's supporting Susan just because of the gender, because she's a woman, she's supporting another woman, and people tend to dismiss that. Whereas if Bob speaks up, vice president of another division, and says Susan's fantastic, she should be promoted, the reality is that carries more weight. And so it's critically important for women to have male sponsors for that reason. And the other reason is because, as I mentioned before, men are in the decision-making positions of power. And so for women, so this is going to help women get to the next level, but it also is going to help men because it shows that men are genuine in their support, helping women come up through the ranks and supporting women. So it'll help men. It would probably help improve their reputation amongst the female workforce, the females in the workforce. But it also helps them support a more diverse group of people, of employees. So that's a win-win. Yeah, it's a win-win.
And so then my next question would be, so then if I was a woman in a corporation, I would need to figure out how I wanted to approach a male colleague to advocate for me, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, then there's a couple things. Are you going to ask how you do that?
Well, I mean, I would think, well, first of all, having this book, I mean, when is the book published, by the way?
The book should be out probably in the July timeframe.
Okay, awesome.
So 3 or 4 months.
And just so the viewers know, I will be posting this video on my website with Shawn's website address and everything. Yes, I was going to ask, how would a woman ask for that type of advocacy or sponsorship?
Yeah, well, there's a couple ways. First of all is to leverage your network is the first thing. Women, it's interesting because when it comes to networking, men tend to be better networkers at work. like I said, it's a cliche, but many men still play golf as the primary means of building relationships still in many industries.
Yeah.
And so men do a very good job networking with other men. And if you look at men's networks, their primary networks are made up of men, and a very small percentage of women, but mostly men. So men are great at networking, and they've honed those skills. But what's interesting, though, is women actually have bigger networks. So if women just leverage their existing networks, we would, that could be a tremendous strength for us. So that's the first suggestion, is to reach out to your networks. And so let's say you want the vice president of your division that you work in to sponsor you, your sponsor. Let's say he's someone you know of, but you don't know him very well, or maybe you've never even met him. One thing is to ask around by your network and find out who knows him. Ask for an introduction. Warm introductions, one way to do it. And that's often the best way, is to ask for an introduction. And most people, if you're genuine in your approach, and you approach it as you want to learn, you're motivated, you're capable, and you really want to improve and develop, most leaders are going to say yes to that. Yeah,
absolutely.
So leveraging your networks to get an introduction, and then from there, just build rapport. And even another suggestion too is, a lot of executives are busy, don't have a lot of time, and it doesn't have to be a mentoring. A sponsorship relationship is different than a mentoring relationship. Mentoring, we spend, most people will spend like an hour to a month with a mentor. They'll have lunch or they'll have a mentor meeting. Sponsorship is different because you don't spend as much time with the sponsor, but you need to touch base enough for them to be aware of your skills and your accomplishments and your achievements.
Right.
So that's one thing to convey too, is that you want him, the leader, to get to know you as far as your accomplishments, but it doesn't have to be an in-depth personal level. You just want to make sure that he's aware of your accomplishments, your competencies, and what you bring to the company. And then that you're not seeking a huge time commitment. You're just seeking some support and some guidance and some advocacy is the key word to help get you some visibility and get you to the next position you're interested in.
Great. Well, thank you for that. I never would have thought that it would be going to the guys, and it's great that it makes sense, though. It totally makes sense that you need to leverage the people that, just the decision makers, So, the other thing you had put in your book is, before we get into this, just for, what about a lot of, I've heard men talk about that the reason women don't make as much money as they do is because they don't ask for it or negotiate it. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah. So there are differences in negotiation. There are, and I've studied this one extensively, and this also comes up in the classroom, my MBA classes that I teach, and I even have them role play around negotiation. And what the data shows is that is true. That is true. That women often, they don't, for women, so basically when it comes to negotiation, men negotiate competitively and are focused on economic outcomes. Women negotiate cooperatively and are focused on win-win outcomes. Okay, so that's the first thing, is we're very different in how we approach negotiation. So because women value win-win outcomes and are focused on people and relationships, they aren't as aggressive in asking because they don't want to damage the relationship. That is the reason that women don't negotiate aggressively. It's because they value that relationship, whereas men are more focused on that economic outcome, and so men will be more competitive and more aggressive in their negotiating. And so that is a key difference. Another thing that's interesting, Mary, is that when it comes to negotiating, lots of data show that women actually do assert themselves more when it comes to negotiating on behalf of other people. So they will negotiate aggressively if they're negotiating for their team, for example, or someone on the team versus themselves. So women do, it's very interesting. But there are, because we value different things and we seek different outcomes, that is very true that women do not negotiate as aggressively as men. It doesn't mean that we can't. We certainly can. But because women value relationships and want to preserve that, we don't want to, push it. And so oftentimes women just accept the offer they're given, and they're happy with it. They don't push for more. But there's lots of books out there on this topic, I'm sure, as you will know.
On negotiating.
Yeah, and I actually think it's a great skill that women should build, because it's going to help. It's going to help not only the individual, but again, a ripple effect on the family. So, women actually should be negotiating, where it's warranted.
Absolutely. I mean, to me, I started my first business when I was like 33 or something, and learned that was part of what I needed to do to be successful, is learn to negotiate. So I read a lot of books and that sort of thing, and not only did it help me from a financial standpoint, but from a self-esteem or self-worth standpoint, that it made me feel more equal in my relationships, because I wasn't just accepting what was being presented to me. I was having a say and having my own, stating my own worth and the reason why I felt that it should, the price or whatever I was negotiating should be a certain way. So to me, it's also just about owning your worth, your value.
Yeah. You know what it boils down to? It depends on what your objective is for that particular negotiation. If the objective is to get as much money as possible, then go for it. Then negotiate aggressively. If the outcome is to preserve, let's say you're negotiating with a colleague or someone maybe in another department, or even your boss. If the objective is to preserve the relationship, then you would try and seek a win-win. So it really depends on what the outcome is that you're looking for. Yeah, and there's going to be times when it's going to be both. There's certain times when you're going to need to, and you should negotiate aggressively, and there's other times when the relationship, the win-win, is more important.
Absolutely. I was just curious about the whole millennial generation and the different. I didn't even know that we were calling them the Gen Z.
Yeah.
How is that going to impact women's leadership and equality in the workplace?
Yeah, it's a great question, and not a lot of people are talking about this, but there's been a lot of focus on the millennials, right?
Yeah.
So millennials are roughly 1980 to 2000 when they were born. But they're a large cohort, and so there's large numbers of millennials in the workforce, and even taking leadership roles as we speak. And so they're actually they're impacting the workplace because they have different needs, different interests at work versus the older generations. And so they have different expectations, different needs. And what's fascinating to me, and I see this trend, that millennials actually have a tremendous amount in common with women with what women are interested in the workplace, and women's expectations and needs. And so here's a couple examples for you. Is women have always valued, work-life balance, not just for the sake of having children and raising families, but because women value, their free time and their independence. And so women have, for years and years valued that. Well, we know now that many millennials, even millennial men, now value work-life balance as much as women have for decades. And so I think that's a very positive trend. Another difference I could share with you is the need for flexibility and telecommuting. And so, millennials, if companies aren't offering, flex time and telecommuting and different ways to make them, help them integrate their works in their lives, they're going to leave. And they are leaving. And the current data shows that, millennials stick around 2, maybe 3 years from job to job, and they're on to the next one. And so, and that's just
that's
a couple
interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, another thing too that that the millennials and women have in common is that the focus on being socially responsible. So they're seeking, they seek companies that are more corporately socially responsible and that are giving back to the communities, and that's something that women also value. And so they're aligned on that area too. And so the trend is that millennials are changing the workforce, and it's aligning more with what women are looking for. Now, to take that even a step further is look at Gen Z. So millennials are also called Gen Y. So there's
they are. I didn't know that.
Yeah, they are. And so if you just think of it, so basically right now there's 4 generations working side by side in the workplace. There's your traditionalists, or sometimes called your veterans, and then your baby boomers, and then you have Gen X, Generation X, and then you have Gen Y, also called millennials, and behind them, their younger siblings are Gen Zs.
Right.
And so these kids, I can call them kids now because I'm much older than them probably, but these youngsters are, currently about 16 and younger. And so they're not yet into the workforce, but they soon, the next 4 or 5 years, they will be entering the workforce. And so the Gen Zs are not only going to have similar, desire similar aspects of work as to millennials, but I think it's even going to be taken a step further. They're going to demand that companies are more socially responsible. They're going to demand, their flex time and ability to manage their works and their lives. And so I think as we see more and more generations, younger generations coming up, I'm very encouraged about changes that we're going to see in the workplace. And I think that bodes very well for women, because a lot of the aspects that younger generations are looking for is also what women seek.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great news. It makes complete sense now that you explain it, and that's awesome. So thank you so much. Well, I think we're going to have to wrap since we've got a time limit here, but I always like to ask my guests, the last question is, what message do you want to leave with viewers? Like, what's the message that you're most passionate about that you want to leave with the viewers today?
Don't be discouraged, and don't give up. And actually, just the opposite. I am encouraged, and I would encourage your viewers to be encouraged as well. Yes, there is a tremendous leadership gender gap today.
Right.
Yes, there's a gap. Yes, there are emotional intelligence differences, as we've talked about. Yes, there are a number of barriers. And yes, there are gender differences, hardwired and socialized gender differences. However, looking at all that, be encouraged, because women are in the workforce, they're getting education and their experience. And also women are more empowered now than ever. And so that's a positive trend. On top of that, you have new generations that we just discussed. We're seeing very positive trends there. So I'm encouraged by the way that's happening. And, finally, there's more global pressure and more global dialogue around gender equality and gender parity now more than ever. And companies are increasingly under scrutiny to be more diverse and to have more women in leadership roles and be more inclusive. So I think if you take all those together, they're all very positive trends. So my message for your viewers is to be encouraged. Don't give up on your dreams, and and making gains slowly but surely.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. So how can people get a hold of you?
So my website is probably the best way to reach me, and that's drshawnandrews.com. Pretty simple. Just DR, no period, drshawnandrews.com. And so they can reach me through my website, and I am very responsive, so I have a quick turnaround time, and I get back to everyone quickly.
Awesome.
There's also a phone number on my website as well that folks can call. But probably the best way is to my website to reach me, because they can see my background and see some information on my research.
Yeah.
I'm also on and Twitter as well. And the Twitter handle is @Dr. Shawn.
Perfect. Well, Shawn, this has been such a pleasure. I am so thrilled that you wrote this book and that you were able to come and share such great information and great research and great hope for who we are as women. And it's just been amazing. So with that, I'm going to have to say goodbye for now, but I would love to talk with you again in the future. So thank you so much. And let me go ahead and switch back to my own screen. And thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here.
All right. Thanks. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Bye. I always do a coaching tip every week because I am a life coach, and I've been a coach for about 25 years now. And the tip that I wanted to bring forward today is a tip that's had a very transformational impact on me in my life. And it's really about people that have issues with disappointing others. It's about basically what it is. It's about learning how to practice disappointment so that you can actually be true to yourself. And this is not that you're intentionally wanting to disappoint or displease people, but so many times when we're raised in families where we're told that we need to please other people first, or we're bad people, or we get so focused on pleasing everyone else that we don't really get in touch with who we are and what we really want in our lives. And so one of the strategies or tips that I've used on in my own life as well as with clients is just practicing the art of disappointing in a very, start with baby steps, let me just say that. I remember when my coach first gave me this assignment, it was sort of like, oh my God, how am I going to do that? Because I would feel so bad about disappointing people. And so, I mean, this is like as little as somebody asking you to go to a certain restaurant for lunch, and instead of saying, oh, sure, no problem, saying, you know, I really would prefer this type of food. That's one small thing you can do if that's something that's uncomfortable for you. If you're totally fine with asking for what you need with those types of things, you can take it to the next level, which might be when somebody asks you for support and you know that you're not, you know, in a place where you can really follow through and be there for them, that you actually let them know that you're not able to do that, and not have to give excuses or justify the reasoning and that sort of thing. Or when people invite you out for lunch, or one of the things I thought I'd share with you guys, because I was really challenged with this when I first started doing it, is I thought, okay, how can I disappoint people that I don't have relationships with? That would be even a better place for me to start. And so when I used to walk at the mall when it would be really, really super cold or really hot, and so I have a mall by my house, and so I'd go off and walk, and there'd always be these, you know, the kiosk businesses in the middle of the mall. They'd always be trying to, you know, bring me in to sell me some kind of face cream because I'm a baby boomer and they know. And before I did this exercise, I would always acknowledge them at least, you know, oh, sorry, no, but I'm not interested. And I thought, I'm going to practice just like having my headset in and pretending that I don't even hear them. And so I started with that and thinking, you know, they'll probably get disappointed because I'm not acknowledging them. So I started with that, and then I eventually got to the place where I took my headset off so they knew I wasn't on my phone, and I just kept my focus forward and didn't acknowledge their pitching me for things. And oh my God, before when I used to do that, I would feel so bad not even acknowledging them. But since I was working on, you know, stretching, it really helped me move to the next level in other areas of my life. Assignment for you is to really make a commitment to practicing disappointing people at least 3 times a week, if not once every day. And you'll be amazed at what happens when you do that. And if you want to email me and let me know how it goes, I'd be glad to share that with the show next week. As far as coaching goes, I am a transformational life coach, and I am working with just a few individual clients, and so I wanted to put that out there that if you're a woman, I'm really called to working with women that are in a similar age range as me, which is mid-50s, that have been working hard their whole life, that have really gotten to a place where they're ready for a new level of meaning and fulfillment work, and they're feeling a bit stuck in terms of how to get there or how to make that transition. Maybe they have a special gift, or maybe they've overcome some adversities that they want to be able to help other people overcome. Those are the types of women that I really do well working with. So if you are in that genre, just go to my website, which is right above me, marygiuliani.net, and go to the coaching page. So I also want to mention that next week we have a great new guest. Her name is Shasta Nelson, who wrote she's got 2 books. One is Friendships Don't Just Happen, which is an amazing book. I mean, it talks all about, and it's true, you know, people just don't drop into our lives and become our best friends. We have to develop relationships. And she really helped me increase my circle of friends and make some really good friends that have made my life so much more fulfilling, and having that kind of support around me really transformational. So she's going to be our guest next week. Again, she wrote the book Friendships Don't Just Happen, as well as another book called Frientimacy. She actually coined the term, and she's all about helping women create friendships that really matter and that are really meaningful. So I can't wait to have her on the show as well. So make sure you tune in next Wednesday at 7 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. If you are wanting to know who the guests are in advance and you're not tuning in, please make sure you get on my email list. Go to my website, marygiuliani.net, and go to the free newsletter and just sign up for the newsletter. That way you'll know who's coming up, as well as get my blogs. And I have a great little quiz there, too, on how to tell how true to yourself you are and get specific tips based on your score. So let's see, is there anything else I want to say? Oh, of course, my last thing. What's one thing that you're willing to make a commitment to do tomorrow where you can be true to yourself at a level, and just make that one small commitment, take that one small step, and you'll be amazed at what happens? And so with that, I'm going to sign off and say, make it a great week, and we will see you next week. And now I can say no to requests and not feel guilty and all kinds of things. So